Before starting any MSB product repair, there are a few crucial tips to keep in mind. When touching any circuit boards or electrical components, it is always best to touch the chassis of the product first, or use an ESD safe work surface or grounding bracelet to prevent any electrostatic discharge from harming the product. It is important to keep track of all hardware throughout the build process to prevent any loose hardware from getting left inside the unit. Also, keep in mind that there is a variety of hardware used in each product. Some products use soft nylon screws to prevent unwanted electrical connections. These screws are delicate and can cross-thread very easily. Other products have crucial heat-sensitive devices. If over-tightened, they can crack and shorten the life of the product. Pay careful attention to what type of hardware is being used and how it is being used when disassembling your product. Begin by removing any digital inputs or blank modules from your unit. To remove the output card, flip the unit over and use a number 1 Phillips to remove the 3 440 screws and lock washers along the jack panel. Be sure to keep track of all your hardware throughout the repair process. Flip the unit over and remove the output card by using the open portion next to the jack panel. It helps to gently use the RCA connector to lightly work the card loose while applying pressure to the back of the jack panel with your other hand. To replace the output card, start by guiding it into the chassis with the connectors raised and the jack panel flat to find the connectors at the back of the pocket. Once you feel the module begin to seat into the connectors, brace the chassis and apply pressure at either end of the output card at roughly the same height as the circuit board. Now use a number 1 Phillips to reinstall the 3 440 screws and washers along the bottom of the jack panel. To remove the cover, use a 3/16 Allen driver and remove the 4 1/4-20 screws from the corners of the chassis. Then, lift the side of the cover up to find and disconnect the display cable before lifting the cover off completely. Now you can unplug the display cable and RS-232 cable from the back of the display. Once unplugged, use a 7/64 ball end Allen driver to remove the 9/632 nylon screws at the back of the display. Don't remove these screws completely, just back them out until they are just barely protruding into the display pocket. Now you can remove the display by pulling it slightly back and then up out of the pocket. Most of the time, the display mask will come out with the board. Now you can access the tinted glass and diffusion layer and lift them out of the pocket as well. At this point, you can replace the buttons if needed by pushing them out from the front. You can install new ones by putting them back in the same way. When reinstalling the display, stack up the glass and diffusion layer with the glossy side of the glass facing the inside of the unit and the more satin side facing outward. Then put the 2 pieces into the cutout at the front of the display pocket. Reinstall the mask back onto the display. Pay attention to the orientation to align the cutout with the IR sensor. Lower the display board back into the pocket, and once it is placed properly in the unit, use your hand to tighten 2 of the nylon screws to hold it in place. Hand tighten the 4 632 screws behind the display. Be careful to not over-tighten them. If you see them start to bend or deflect slightly, stop. Once all 4 screws are tight, tap on the front of the display glass to ensure that it does not move and that it's properly seated around the edges. Once you have verified that the display is seated properly, you can tighten the 2 nylon screws behind the knob. Then tighten the 3 screws behind the button portion to push the board completely forward against the small metal tabs at the front of the pocket. Then adjust each screw individually to achieve the desired button feel while making sure that each screw is still tight and none of the buttons rattle. At this point, you can reinstall the RS-232 connector. Pay close attention to the orientation of the missing pin and the blocked portion of the connector. Then, you can reinstall your display cable as shown. If you need to replace the knob, use a 7/64 Allen driver to remove the 632 screw and washer at the back of the knob. It helps to hold the driver still and twist the knob to loosen or tighten the screw. To replace the knob, simply put it back in the front of the unit and retighten the 632 screw and washer. Now switching over to the subassembly, start by removing the output card. If you have not done so already, use a number 1 Phillips to remove the 3 440 screws located under the back edge of the jack panel. Once the screws have been removed, you can simply pull the card out by separating the connectors holding it to the motherboard. Now use a 7/64 Allen driver to remove the 8 632 nylon screws on either side of the Prime DAC modules. Now you can pull the DAC modules out. Pay attention to the order they are installed so they can be reinstalled in the exact same slot. The Prime DAC modules are tested and hand-selected to achieve the desired performance for each channel based on which slot that they are installed in. Use a number 1 Phillips to remove the 3 440 screws and washers along the top of the motherboard. Use a 3/32 Allen driver to remove the 4 440 device screws and lock washers. Keep track of the washers to make sure none of them get lost below the motherboard. Use a number 1 Phillips to remove the 10 256 screws and washers along the large connectors at the edge of the motherboard. The motherboard should be loose now and can be removed at this point. Before installing the new motherboard, use non-silicone, non-conductive thermal compound on each of the 4 devices on the bottom of the motherboard. It only requires a small amount. Too much thermal paste is not good for thermal conductivity. Set the motherboard into the base metal and align the 3 holes at the top of the motherboard before using a number 1 Phillips to tighten the 3 440 screws with each of their lock washers and flat washers. Now use a number 1 Phillips to replace the 10 256 screws and washers along the connectors. Use a 3/32 Allen driver to reinstall the 4 440 screws and lock washers for each of the devices. Do not over-tighten these screws. They just need to be tight enough to flatten the lock washer and push the device against the base metal. Now, reinstall the DAC modules in the exact order they were removed. Any warranty or repair modules that may be sent as a set from the factory will either have the order noted on them or be hand-selected to function at the same performance level, regardless of placement. Once installed, replace the 8 632 nylon screws on either side of the DAC modules. Do not tighten these screws until all of them have been installed and make contact with the hooked feature on each of the DAC modules. Once each of the screws are touching the DAC modules, you can finish tightening them evenly. Now you can replace the sub-assembly back into the chassis by aligning the left edge in the cutout and keeping the right side lifted to reconnect the display cable. Be sure to not pinch any of the cables when closing the unit. Now use a 3/16 Allen driver to reinstall the 4 1/4-20 cover screws. It is best to start in opposite corners to help align the cover properly. Now you can reinstall the output card by flipping the unit over and guiding it in until it meets the connectors at the back of the pocket. Once you feel the module begin to seat into the connectors, brace the chassis and apply pressure at either end of the output card at roughly the same height as the circuit board. Use a number 1 Phillips to replace the 3 440 screws and washers under the back edge of the jack panel. Last step is to reinstall your digital inputs or any blank modules that were previously installed. Now the unit is ready to be reinstalled into your system.